If you're new here, here's a little overview of what Sunday Assembly is. Sunday Assembly Detroit is a secular congregation that meets to hear great talks, sing songs, and generally celebrate the wonder of life. It's service for anyone who wants to live better, help often, and wonder more, our three tenets. Alrighty, now is a fun part of the program where we share something that has happened to us this month that's exciting. I will go first, and anyone else who wants to participate, you can go ahead and just unmute yourself and tell us what's been going on. So for me, I recently, as you all know from last month, was fostering some kittens, and one of them really resonated with me and my spouse and all of our animals, and we decided to adopt her. So our first foster fail, or foster success if you think about it, since the goal is to get them all adopted anyway. So we now have 4 cats, which is a lot, but you know, we love all of them and can provide for them. So the win in my book. Anyone else who wants to go, just go ahead and unmute yourself and let us know what's been happening.
Well, Victoria and I got our vaccine shots on Thursday. And then last week, our first ones, yeah, we have to go back in 3 weeks. And I got the garden beds all set up, so I'm ready for planting.
I guess John's not here because he's getting his family vaccinated, so
yeah,
that's fine.
Well, I'm getting my garden in too, except I can't build any more boxes because the lumber prices are crazy. And then when I was out working in my garden yesterday, the neighbor tried to start his garage on fire. So that was kind of some excitement for the neighborhood, but he got it out. So thank God.
And she also got her vaccine last weekend. So Johnson & Johnson, so she's totally done.
Anyone growing their marijuana plants in their basement yet? Just joking.
I do have like a whole grow light thing set up in the basement for starting the plants. I made an aeroponics thing once, and people were like, "Oh, so you're like growing weed?" Then I was like, "No, just a pole bean." I wish it was better. I just like the challenge.
Yeah, I had to order liquid fertilizer for my aquatic. I have some plants that are in water with LECA, and so they have to have aquatic nutrients, and I have to get them from the local grow shop.
Yeah, it was really frustrating looking up information about how to make an aeroponics thing, because you basically just hit a bunch of like 420 discussion boards, and it's like, I need the information, but this is going to look really suspect if anyone goes into my tab, my history.
All right, last chance. If anyone has anything exciting going on, speak now or hold your peace, because we're moving on.
How did you get like the little words to come up at the bottom? That's kind of cool.
That's built into Zoom now. You can turn it off. If you go into more, there's an option that says hide subtitles, which is what I do because my ADHD brain can't focus on talking and reading at the same time. So you can turn them off if they're distracting for you like they are for me. But if you want them, it's automatic in Zoom now. That's fun. Cool. Right after we figured out how to do it through a third party a couple months ago, Zoom was like, never mind, we're doing it now for you. So that's fun of them to offer for free. Okay. Go ahead and move on here. All right, that's our demonstration of things for Life Happens. I forgot to switch this out, so this is not what I'll be reading. It didn't save my actual poem that I'm reading, so I'll read it off my phone. But this is Moccasin Flowers by Mary Oliver, a nice springtime poem. All my life so far, I have loved more than one thing, including the mossy hooves of dreams, including the spongy litter under the tall trees. In spring, the moccasin flowers reach for the crackling lick of the sun and burn down. Sometimes, in the shadows, I see the hazy eyes, the lamb lips of oblivion, its deep drowse, and I can imagine a new nothing in the universe, the matted leaves splitting open, revealing the black planks of the stairs. But all my life, so far, I have loved best how the flowers rise and open, how the pink lungs of their bodies enter the fore of the world and stand there shining and willing, the one thing they can do before they shuffle forward into the floor of darkness. They become the trees. Oh, it's very nice and springy. Nice circle of life sort of thing. Alrighty, now on to the main event. Please welcome Drew Lathin to talk about landscaping with native plants to support nature.
All right, I've done this enough times. I think I finally got it down. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Drew Lathin. I have this sustainable landscape business. We only work with native plants. We do things like pollinator gardens and rain gardens and prairie gardens and lawn alternatives. And I think, but with all of those, we're only using native plants. And I think by the end of this, you'll understand why. So back in November of 2018, there was an article in the New York Times talking about the crash of insect populations across the world and also in the United States. That was followed up in February of 2019 with a similar article from The Guardian that talked about how insect populations are set to vanish within the next century at the current rate of decline. Then there was a study that showed that in the last 50 years in the United States and North America, we've lost nearly 30% of our birds. And then there was an article or a study in the UN that talked about how we're facing the loss of 1 million species across the planet. And so you may have heard terms like the sixth extinction event and that we're in the midst of. And in North America, we are facing the loss of many of our plant and animal species. And the main causes of it are really development in agriculture and the associated processes of pesticides, the loss of native plant species, the introduction of native species, climate change, and light pollution. And despite that, yet in my suburban yard, and I live in a pretty sterile, soulless suburb, that there's a lot of lawn, and you can see my yard there in the middle. I have a lot of wildlife. Here's a picture of a bumblebee on wild bergamot and a swamp milk, another bumblebee on swamp milkweed, and you can see underneath here a milkweed beetle. Here's another bumblebee on echinacea. Here is a video of a bumblebee on bottle gentian. This is in September, and you can see it's a closed flower, but only our native bumblebees are strong enough to open that and get in there and pollinate that and to get food. Gulp. So it's pretty cool. This is going on every sunny September afternoon in my front yard rain garden. Here is an October video of my New England aster and all of the bees on it. And you can see many, many species of bees. In my opinion, this is what beekeeping is by providing floral resources for native bees. I'm a bit dismayed by the honeybee craze and people beekeeping. because the solution to, oh, and while I was there, that guy showed up, a yellow sulfur. But as I was saying, the solution to saving our native bees is not the importation of a European bee species. And here's a great black wasp on swamp milkweed in my yard. So all of this stuff is going on all of the time. There's a milkweed beetle there too. See right there, whoops, it's gone. I also have a small pond in my backyard, so dragonflies and damselflies are mating in there and producing dragonflies. This is a clear-wing hummingbird moth. This is actually a moth. Looks like a hummingbird, but it's a moth. See the long proboscis on it, taking nectar from my swamp milkweed. And on the left there is a video I took of a spicebush swallowtail butterfly eating my spicebush leaves. And there is the adult on the right. But I wouldn't have that adult if I didn't have spicebush swallowtail caterpillars, and I wouldn't have spicebush swallowtail caterpillars without spicebush. And then, of course, we know about monarchs. And milkweeds are the only species of plant that will feed monarch caterpillars. So I have caterpillars and adults. And this is a September video I took of monarchs on my liatris, fueling up for their fall migration. And then a tussock moth caterpillar and milkweed beetles on milkweeds. I don't know what that guy is on my spice bush, but all those hairs tell me not to touch. Same with that on my wild bergamot. Here's a cicada on little blue stem. And I do have a pond in my backyard. So here is the American toad just showed up. And here is a male making a lot of noise, looking for a female. And when that happens, you get toad porn. And when that happens, you get babies. In addition to that, the green frogs just showed up. And they are reproducing in my pond as well. Here's a ruby-throated hummingbird on my cardinal flower in my front yard. A mourning dove coming for a drink. Also had a great blue heron show up. Here is a name escapes me, but coming for seeds, and a robin coming for a bath. Here's a Nashville warbler with a caterpillar in its mouth. Mr. and Mrs. Duck have been coming back to my pond since 2016. They were here last week. Here is a robin eating the high-fat berries of red twig dogwood. A female belted kingfisher that plucked a goldfish out of my pond. And because I have songbirds, I also have Cooper's hawks, and I watch them hunt. And possums that are great little animals because they eat lots of ticks and hence are beneficial to human health. There's a raccoon coming for a drink. And because of all of that, I have coyotes as well. And I am regularly picking coyote poop out of my yard. So the question is, how did I do this? How did I get all of this wildlife in my quarter-acre yard? So let's talk a little bit about some ecology. 96% of our terrestrial bird species feed their young caterpillars. So when you look at this chickadee here with a caterpillar, it will only go 50 yards to get caterpillars to feed its young. And within those 50 yards, once it's raising a clutch, it needs between 350 and 570 caterpillars a day, or over the length of raising its clutch, between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars total. And that's all within 50 yards. And so that's a lot of caterpillars. And so that's just one chickadee nest. So now think about 2 chickadee nests, a robin, a cardinal, a wren, and on and on. And that's a lot of caterpillars that are needed to raise birds. In addition to that, lots of things eat insects. And so possums and foxes, skunks, mice, bats, salamanders, and so on. So a world without insects is a world without biological diversity. And so that begs the question, what do insects eat? And they are eating plants. So to talk a little bit about the relationship between plants and insects, let's talk a little bit about monarchs, because they're very charismatic species. They have a spectacular kind of migration. So as I said earlier, monarch caterpillars eat milkweed leaves, and milkweeds are the only species of plants that monarch caterpillars can eat. They can't eat anything else. The adults can take nectar from many species of plants, but the caterpillars can only eat milkweeds. And so the decline of milkweeds has resulted in the great decline in monarchs. And like the monarch, 90% of our insects are specialists and can only eat a narrow range of plants. So whereas the monarch can eat any number of species of milkweeds, and there are 11 different species of milkweeds native to Michigan, this coroner blue butterfly can only eat one species of plant, and that is our eastern lupine. The coroner blue is on the federally endangered species list because of the loss of habitat and the loss of eastern lupine. And so here are some other examples. The Hebrew as a caterpillar, can only eat the leaves of black gum. The fawn sphinx can only eat ash. The royal walnut moth can only eat walnuts and hickories. The witch hazel dagger moth can only eat witch hazels. And so insects can eat a specific plant species when they've evolved certain adaptive mechanisms. The first is their ability to find their host plant. If you've ever looked at a female monarch caterpillar or a female monarch butterfly looking to lay her eggs, she will just keep flying around and around and around until she finds a milkweed, and then bam, land right on the milkweed. So she has very good plant ID skills. The second is the ability to synchronize their life cycle with the plants that they need. And so monarchs are now migrating up from Mexico, and they will not migrate any faster than the milkweeds emerge from the ground. And that is not likely to happen here in Michigan until May. So you won't see monarchs here until May. The third is physical and behavioral adaptations to eat their hosts. They do all kinds of things. So for instance, the monarch caterpillar will snip the petiole of a leaf to stop the flow of sap to the leaves, the sap which can drown it. The toxin is still in the leaf, but it will snip that petiole. And then the digestive enzymes to detoxify plant chemicals. And all plants have chemicals in them to keep insects from eating them. And so these adaptive mechanisms and these evolutionary processes take thousands of years to occur, which means that insects can generally only eat native plants. Those 90% of insects that have a very narrow range of plants that they can eat can only eat native plants, and they can do that because of their co-evolutionary history. So plants do a number of things to protect themselves from being eaten. They can't get up and run away from insects. And so things like thorns and lignins and chemicals are the most common defense for plants. Bitter tastes. So think about an onion and what an onion will do to your sinuses and your eyes. That is a chemical defense that the onion has evolved. So God didn't put onions on this planet for us to cut up and put in a frying pan. What it does to your sinuses is a chemical defense to protect itself. And so it's usually the leaves that feed the young. Butterfly bush that is sold by big horticulture to supposedly is great for butterflies will feed adult butterflies, but it'll feed 0 caterpillars because it's from China and it has chemical toxins in its leaves that prevent any species of caterpillar here from eating it because it doesn't have any coevolutionary history with it. So caterpillars, Doug Talamig did a study on caterpillars on his white oak, and at head height, these are the caterpillars and the numbers that he found on an oak. But go to a Bradford pear, which is also from Asia, he only found 1 species. So when you do a comparison of a white oak and a black cherry, which are native, versus burning bush and cattle and a calorie pear, you see there's no comparison in terms of the number of species that the native oaks and cherries can support than burning bush and the pears. So when we don't have native plants in our yards, we don't have insects. So this is a list of the typical, the usual suspects in our yards. Boxwoods are very common, feeds only 1 species of caterpillar. Forsythias are blooming now, only feeds 1 species of insect. But when you compare it to native species of plants in our yards, you get a lot more support for insect species. And so the bottom line is that native plants produce 4 times the insect biomass, 3 times the insect species, 13 times more caterpillar species, and 35 times more caterpillar biomass. That's 3,500% more caterpillar biomass supported by native plants than non-native plants. So plants are the only thing that can transform the energy of the sun into biomass. And when they're native, they support our insects, the 90% of insects that can only eat native plants, which in turn feed the birds. 96% of our terrestrial bird species can only feed their young caterpillars, and insects feed a whole host of other animals and the things that eat the insects. So when you landscape in a way that does not use native plants, you don't have insects, and that cascades all the way up the food chain. And native plants can tolerate our sub-zero temperatures, our heat, our drought, and insects without any supplemental water and spraying. Think of it this way, who watered the plants before the Europeans got here? They survived just on the water, and then they can survive our temperatures from cold to hot and drought. And they can do that because of their deep root systems. On this picture here, turf grass only has a 4-inch deep root system. So when it dries, when it's dry out, it goes dormant. But our native plants have very deep root systems, 3, 5, 10, and in some instances, 15 feet or more. So when it's dry out, they don't even know that. So this is a picture of my front yard. You can see it's dry because the grass has turned brown, but the perennials, are lush and green because of those deep root systems. So in the past, we used to choose plants because of their decorative value. What I'm advocating is that we choose plants now, not only because of their decorative value, but because they support wildlife and food webs and restore the soil. And we can do that in beautiful ways. So this is a picture around my pond. This is marsh marigold sitting in wet, mucky water. This plant likes wet soils. This whole area back in here has standing water in it 365 days a year. So I'm using plants that evolved in wet soils. And you can see, so we don't need to water. Here is the Kresge Foundation landscape with native plants. This is a client's yard we did with native plants. Here is a pond right in here with the pickerel weed in standing water, and up in here, very dry area with prairie drop seeds. So if you match plants to the conditions in which they evolved, you don't need to water. Here is Retibita around a mailbox. And the other thing you can see is we're using masses and drifts. So here's a big mass of butterfly weed and yarrow, and then a little bit later, some echinacea and more Retibita. And this is my front yard. And one of the things I do to make it look tame and managed is pathways and borders of grass. This is also my front yard. But in the back, I seeded in a prairie where it is just completely wild. But you can make it look tame. Here's a house we did in Bloomfield Hills, tame in front with just using one short prairie grass, but wild in the back. So if insects were to disappear, most of our flowering plants would go extinct. Food webs would collapse. And so you can start by ripping out everything and starting all over again with natives. And I highly recommend it, but it's expensive and time consuming. So maybe you don't want to go there. So back up a little bit and take out a little lawn every year and add a perennial bed or a rain garden, or flip a perennial bed, or at the other end of the spectrum, just any time a plant dies, replace it with native plants. So one of Doug Tallamy's graduate students did a study and found that compared to yards with native plants in them, compared to yards with non-native plants, that is, yards with introduced non-native plants produce 75% fewer caterpillars, 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees, fewer eggs, less likely to survive, fewer fledglings, and delayed maturation. So there is this Native American saying that says that the land isn't ours. It belongs to our children. We're just borrowing it from them. And I'm sure all of you, if you borrow a tool from your neighbor, will return it to them in at least as good condition and as when you found it. And maybe better. Maybe it needs some oil, so you oil it. Maybe you need to clean it, so you clean it before then. And so this proverb says that it's incumbent upon all of us to return the land to our children in better ways, in better condition than when we found it. And there are many ways to do that in terms of recycling and less use of plastic. But one easy way to do that is by using native plants that support food webs. So if there are time for questions, I'll support questions. If you have another plan for what happens next, then we can do that. So I'm basically done other than questions or whatever it is you want to do next.
Perfect. So if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat and I will relay those as a little moderator. I have a question to begin with. I've been looking into replacing my front lawn with moss in addition to my native wildflower beds. Is there any advantage to wildlife and insect populations to switching to moss other than, like, I know you don't have to water it?
I don't really know the answer to the question. So something's got to eat moss. There's got to be some kind of relationship between moss and wildlife. I just don't know what that is.
All right, it's definitely easier on my feet, so that's another advantage for me. I'm also wondering with the pond you have in the backyard, if you have problems with mosquitoes, because I get standing water in my backyard and it's a mosquito heaven back there.
Yeah, I don't have any mosquito or any more mosquito problems in my backyard because of the pond, because there are frogs and toads there, and there are tadpoles in it, and dragonflies are breeding in there, and dragonfly larvae eat mosquito larvae.
Oh, perfect. Okay, Lynn has a question here. Do you know any local sources for purchasing native plants? And we're all in the Metro Detroit area here.
Yeah, so if you Google native plant sales, you should get a bunch of hits on that. There are a number of native plant nurseries. I don't know. I know there are about 5 of them in and around Ann Arbor. The largest is called Wild Type. They are in Mason, which is just to the southeast of East Lansing. So there are more and more places to buy native plants. So just start Googling.
I know if you're in the Rochester Hills Farmers Market, the Rochester pollinators get their plants from the greenhouse in Mason.
Yep. Cranbrook, I think, also has a native plant sale. Of course, with COVID, I don't know what any of those organizations' plans are.
Sure. Okay, any more questions? And thank you again for this presentation. It was very, very incredible to see all the wildlife in your backyard. I'm, as everyone here knows, like the #1 possum fan in the world. So great to see possums back there living their lives, eating all those ticks.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Okay, perfect.
Oh boy, I don't know if I have
Alrighty.
too much to say.
Whatever you want to say, Austin. I have events coming up next, so you don't need to cover that.
Okay, cool. No, I don't think I have much to say today. I think we're hoping to try to get outside coming up in the future for one of the assemblies. So keep your eye out. No promises, depending on how these new variants come through. But yeah, we might be able to get outside a little bit.
All right, thank you, Austin. Our president extraordinaire. Okay, announcement time.
You're not sharing your sound.
Right, this is zoomed up in a weird way. There we go.
And I have no money. So you can imagine the kind of stress that I am under.
Alrighty, just a reminder that you can donate to us. I have PayPal monthly subscription set up, which I love because anytime I have any subscriptions, I immediately forget about them and they just take care of themselves. I would probably be horrified to learn all the things that I've been subscribing to every month. So why don't you do the same thing and just set up a monthly payment for us? The money goes toward things like when we're back in person, any rental fees for that, and also our committees and events that we hold every month. So we're all volunteers here, and it takes a community to build a community. All right, here are some of the events we have coming up. We have the LGBT group hiking at Carpenter Lake Nature Reserve. So that's another fun outdoor event if you want to stretch your legs under the sunshine. That's coming up on April 25th at 2 p.m. We have a knowledge sharing session coming up soon here on April 16th. John will be sharing how to tie different knots, which I'm very psyched about because I only know like 2 knots and I'd love to know more. Really miss the Boy Scout train for that one. We have Wine with Ted. That's the 3rd Thursday every month right here on Zoom at 7 p.m. We also have Game Night, which is the 4th Friday of every month at 7:30 p.m., just to mix it up there. And coming up Sunday, April 18th is our next book club meeting. We will be discussing Siddhartha. So we always have fun, rousing discussions at book club. And one of our newest things, I'll move my head, band practice is coming up. That's the fourth Sunday every month at 11 a.m. We're meeting here online. So if you can hold a tune at all, if you know how to play any sort of instrument, even if it's just like a triangle, maybe a fun tambourine action, join us. It'll be fun. You don't need to be a pro musician. You just need to have a passion for music or music adjacent things. Jingles are fine. All right, here's some meetings that we have coming up because we love meetings. The Assembly Committee meeting is coming up tomorrow. So if you have thoughts about this assembly, things we could do better, things you'd like to see incorporated, go ahead and meet us here on Zoom at 7 p.m. tomorrow and we'll go over that together. The leadership meeting is open to everyone, not just leadership, and that's happening April 26th at 7 p.m. And finally, the LGBT small group meets May 3rd, so it meets the first Monday every month, also at 7 p.m., a running theme. If you ever wonder when we're meeting, it's probably 7 p.m. All right, and that's all we have today.